A couple of decades after the fall of the Roman Republic and a couple of decades before the death of Christ, the first Roman emperor commissioned a work that would glorify the origins of Rome. Virgil's Aeneid is that work, an epic poem that continues Homer's Iliad. It may be said to be the Trojan Iliad and Odyssey. Virgil's Aeneid, analysis and critique. This epic poem is very much as if a continuation of the Iliad. However, it is so about the Trojans. In this poem, the Trojan survivors center the narrative. However, much as in Homer's works, to a certain extent and in most cases, the story is framed with an impartial valuation, meaning no opposing side holds as if a moral high ground. In fact, much of the combat, suffering, and destruction is described as a natural order of life or the cosmos. As such, this poem not only continues the story from the fall of Troy, but it very much retains the theme, inclination, and context of the original story. I say that there are only three main abstract differences. First, in this work, Virgil uses the story to explain and describe much about Rome. As such, this poem contains an ever-prevalent nationalistic praise and focus. Second, the impartialities on occasion seem to border on environmentalism or equality among all species. Lastly, the story contains many elements, both abstract and symbolic, that will later be mainstream in Christianity. As for nationalism, let it be clear that Virgil does more than merely reference certain events or people of Roman history. He also as if explains the origin of many Roman cultural practices. These are things as varied as animal hunts, athletic games, children's exercises, funeral rites, and religious ceremonies. Thus, this poem must be an invaluable aid and tool for any cultural historian. Although nationalism may seem a great depart from Homer, this poem manages to avoid glorifying war and the search for power and glory. Yes, I believe that Homer's Iliad does likewise. This may not be clear given the repeated references to Rome's historical heroes. Yet, all the deaths in the poem are described as either inglorious or natural to the course of the cosmos, indistinct to the deaths of wild animals. Yes, Aeneas shows great emotion over the death of his father and Pallas, the son of an allied king, yet emotion is not contrary to Homer. In fact, the argument, I conclude, is that in human emotion, from a subjective perspective, is the only significance in any human suffering. This is entirely like Homer's Iliad. Yet, perhaps echoing the integral Roman historical mythology, such as the Horatii brothers or Brutus' execution of his own sons, in this poem the duty is first and foremost to nation, family is second. In this poem a man, Aeneas, abandons a loving woman, Dido. Observe the difference and similarity from Homer's Odyssey. Yes, Odysseus must, time and time again, confirm his commitment to Penelope, but the wily hero is moved by a sense of duty to family. Family is the main message in Homer's second epic. Aeneas, on the other hand, abandons his love for Dido because of a sense of duty towards his nation. It may be said, Rome is Aeneas' Penelope. In that portion of the poem, Dido is little more than a Circe or Calypso or the Sirens. Aeneas must break free of family love to accomplish his duty. I must also note, regarding political history, it is curious that most of the history of the Republic is skipped or not emphasized. Rather, the majority of extensive references are of either the men that partook in the collapse, such as Julius Caesar and Octavian Augustus, who are unequivocally praised, or the time before the Republic. In fact, the only reference to the era of democracy is during the war with Carthage, which is a large focus on the early portions of the poem. Of course, surely Virgil was not free to express too much love for the democratic republic. Now, about my claim that the poem often borders on environmentalism. First, one must acknowledge that at the time there must have been some degree of awareness or consciousness about the issue. For example, in the nearly contemporary play titled Octavia, Seneca decries how human beings are destined to destroy themselves by their mismanagement of the natural world. As such, consider how in this poem there are references to human souls being tied or infused into the natural flora. Or how a flock of Furies, mythical winged creatures, successfully argue that it is humans that are invading their own natural spaces. That they, the Furies, are the victims of human excessive expansion. Consider how these details exist in a backdrop wherein human death and triumph are as natural and indistinct from all other natural processes. Perhaps I am running the risk of seeing more than what is truly present. With that prior thought in mind, consider the nearly Christian elements of the poem. At one point, Aeneas' child is described as the chosen divine child. He even grows a fiery halo around his head. Likewise, in Hades, Virgil includes a place where the bad or evil are punished, and a place where the good or commendable are rewarded. It also contains elements, such as Minos, that is simply too similar to the role of Christian Saint Peter. I do believe that this poem has to be understood as part of the process that eventually cemented into Christianity. In fact, some may even argue that Augustus, the poet's patron, might have been key to that cultural transformation. Regardless, it must be admitted, Virgil's Hades also contains things that are not currently included in any Christian denomination. Since I always end the sections of my videos with a novel aphorism that I crafted as I read the work, please accept the following gift.
As only a vain father would demand a child to follow in his footsteps, only a lazy child would fail to find his own path.
First book, the Trojan refugees meet the Queen of Carthage. This epic poem begins with the words of an omnipresent narrator. I must say, at the beginning this voice is not altogether clear. The poet seems to relate various elements that will ensue throughout the tale. It is clear that the story will be about the origins of Rome. Likewise, that Hera, the divine wife of Zeus, the king of the Olympians, aims to hamper the seed that will give rise to this most glorious of cities. There is also a reference to Carthage. It is said that Rome will one day destroy it. Lastly, the voice sings of Troy and of its destruction. From this ruined city flows a fleet of refugees. They head towards Italy, but Hera wishes to derail them. She complains that her vengeance is not done until all the blood of Troy is completely eradicated from the face of the earth. The goddess calls upon the aid of a certain Aeolus, a god of the wind, to derail the Trojan fleet and crash them on the shores of Africa, near Carthage. She explains to this deity,
"A race of wandering slaves, abhorred by me, with prosperous passage cut the Tuscan sea. To fruitful Italy their course they steer, and for their vanquished gods design new temples there. Raise all thy winds, with night involve the skies, sink or disperse my fatal enemies."
It must be remembered that the fight for Troy was also a fight between the gods, the likes of Venus and Mars supporting the Trojans. The winds consent to Hera's request. When the storm strikes the ships, a hero within them, the Trojan chief, Aeneas, is quoted lamenting their misery. After their ships crash on the beaches of North Africa, the whole of which is described very vividly, Neptune, the god of the sea, appears. He is angry at the winds for disturbing his realm without his own consent. Therefore,
he smoothed the sea, as, when in tumults rise the ignoble crowd, mad are their motions, and their tongues are loud, and stones and brands in rattling volleys fly. If then some grave and pious man appear, they hush their noise, and quenches their innate desire of blood.
I rather liked this analogy. It is something that is perhaps as if lost in modernity. In antiquity, seemingly, it was far more common for a single voice to make a storm or a calm out of a crowd. The Trojans managed to step out of their ships, take a brief break, and a certain Achates lights a fire as Aeneas surveys their location. Then, the two priors set out on a hunt. They catch 7 deer, which they divide between the crew of the 7 shipwrecks. As they eat, the hero attempts to cheer his fellow refugees by saying,
"What greater ills hereafter can you bear? Resume your courage and dismiss your care. An hour will come with pleasure to relate your sorrows past as benefits of fate."
This is a most paradoxical truth in life, one that is a joy to know, rather than merely understand. Aeneas' words animates them, but their joy is short-lived as soon thereafter they think of all the companions they have lost. The scene changes as now Venus, the deity, implores aid from Zeus. The great king of the gods tells her that it is the will of fate for Aeneas, the goddess son, to give birth to Rome. Therefore, this future will be completed. Nothing can stop it. Jupiter even provides a list of the future progeny of the hero until the time of Romulus and Remus. What is more, in a distant future,
An age is ripening in revolving fate, when Troy shall overturn the Grecian state, and sweet revenge our conquering sons shall call, to crush the people that conspired her fall.
jocularly, Zeus goes as far as mentioning Julius Caesar, from which allegedly will follow a time of great peace and prosperity across the entire world, LOL. To ensure that all unfolds according to fate, as paradoxical as such a thing may seem, Jupiter sends Hermes to counsel the queen of the Carthaginians and tells Venus to do likewise with her son. The next day, after a sleepless night, the two Trojan heroes, Aeneas and his friend Achates, leave in search of any population that may aid them. They quickly find a most beautiful young woman. This is Venus disguised as a mortal. It is curious that she carries about as if she were Artemis. Either way, they learn from her about Carthage, a colony of Tyre. She says,
Phoenician Dido rules the growing state, who fled from Tyre to shun her brother's hate. Great were her wrongs, her story full of fate, which I will sum in short.
The story is simple enough. It involves a family dispute fueled by power, lust, and greed. Dido's brother assassinates her husband, and she feels forced to flee with a small contingent of persons and settles the new city of Carthage. Aeneas, in return, tells the beautiful dame all about their own troubles. Feeling pity for her child, Venus tells them that their fate will turn. She counsels them to go to Carthage, where they will find aid. Lastly, she reveals her true identity as she flies away. Curiously, Aeneas knows that this was his mother. He knows he is a child of divinity. When they arrive at the city, they move without interruption as Venus, by some sort of mist, makes them invisible. Life in the city is described as there are many mentions to the many laborers and structures. It is even said that there are
holy senates, elected by voice.
Eventually, they encountered the most holy site wherein a temple to Hera was built and where the queen is expected to hold her court. Here they see a painting in progress depicting the very recent Trojan War. Surely this is but a literary tool that the poet employs to describe some of the prequel. Regardless, I found the description most moving. Let me quote, speaking of Aeneas.
He stopped, and weeping said,
O friend, even here, the monuments of Trojan woes appear. Our known disasters fill even foreign lands. See there, where old unhappy Priam stands. Even the mute walls relate the warrior's fame, and Trojan griefs the Tyrians' pity claim.
Many of the heroes are depicted and described, from Achilles and Diomed to the death of Hector. Then Dido appears. The narrator says that she is as beautiful as Diana. She comports herself with perfect political decorum, mounts her throne and begins taking petitions, hearing complaints, and dispensing justice and laws. By coincidence, some of Aeneas' band is also present. These are not part of the 7 ships he crashed with, rather others that had become separated during the storm at some prior point in time. They describe to Dido their fate and journey and ask for permission and aid in repairing their ships and continuing their journey. Of course, they mention their lost leader, and Dido says that she will help them and send a party to search for any other shipwrecks. Now the hero asks Venus to make him visible. The goddess not only does so, but also improves his appearance. He is described by Aphrodite's power as seeming most handsome. I find jocular the description.
Like polished ivory, beauteous to behold, or Parian marble, when enchased in gold, thus radiant from the circling cloud he broke, and thus with manly modesty he spoke.
I also find most commendable and noteworthy Aeneas' following lines.
What thanks can wretched fugitive return? The gods, if gods to goodness are inclined, and more than all the gods, your generous heart. Conscious of worth, requite its own desert. Your honor, name, and praise shall never die.
Yes, those are the three most certain rewards of altruistically good deeds. The gods, if they be good or if they exist, one's own self-valuation, and the praise of others. The queen explains that she is indirectly related to the Trojan conflict. This requires understanding the story of Teucer, the half-brother of Ajax the Large. Unfortunately, I will not explain the details as they are convoluted and irrelevant. Either way, I like the queen's lines.
I myself, like you, have been distressed, till heaven afforded me this place of rest. Like you, an alien in a land unknown, I learned to pity woes so like my own.
She sends a great banquet and many supplies to the castaways. In return, Aeneas sends for his child, Iulus, to return with whatever presents they may bestow upon the queen. I must mention, it is liable to confuse at times. Aeneas' son is sometimes called Iulus and sometimes called Ascanius. Either way, the scene changes to Mount Olympus. Venus declares a worry, a fear. She speaks to her divine son, Cupid. She explains her anxieties and asks him a favor.
Thou knowst, my son, how Jove's revengeful wife, by force and fraud, attempts thy brother's life. I suspect the town where Juno reigns, for this 'tis needful to prevent her art. Take thou his form and shape, thyself a boy, assume a boy's dissembled face, and with sweet kisses in her arms constraints, thou mayst infuse thy venom in her veins.
Simply put, she asks Cupid to inculcate into Dido's heart love for Aeneas. It is curious as prior to this the narrator had already said that the queen was taken with the hero's appearance. Either way, while Cupid does as his mother instructed him, the goddess delays the real child of Aeneas, Ascanius, by putting him to sleep. In the Carthaginian palace, they have a banquet when the god arrives disguised like the hero son. The narrator says,
Unhappy Dido little thought what guest. How dire a god she drew so near her breast. But he, not mindless of his mother's prayer, molds her heart anew, and blots her former care. The dead is to the living love resigned, and all Aeneas enters in her mind.
As such, the queen forgets her deceased husband and now finds herself madly taken by Aeneas. The poet then describes the nature or activities of the banquet. After they fill their hunger and begin drinking wine, a poet sings of what Atlas, the Titan, discovered and shared with humanity. Yes, it is unequivocal that Atlas was an astronomer, not as he is often depicted. It is said that he discovered much of the movement of the moon, the reason why eclipses occur, what brings about rain and storm, even what truly makes the earth shake. This is very paradoxical as the whole poem is a myth that makes use of myth. Meaning, consider, Poseidon is supposed to be the cause of earthquakes, LOL. After the song, Dido asks Aeneas to share details about the fall of Troy. By her questions, it is made clear that the refugees have been traveling in restless sea for over 7 years. As such, their journey is as hard as those who triumphed.
Suffering teaches pity, as long as your ego suffers enough for you to cease taking pride in having suffered.
Second book, Aeneas describes the fall of Troy. This book begins exactly where and when the prior ended. Aeneas is preparing to tell Dido, the queen, and the court of Carthage all about the fall of his city, Troy. Prior to entering a description of the Trojan War, Aeneas says,
All that I saw and part of which I was, not even the hardest of our foes could hear, nor stern Ulysses tell without a tear. I will restrain my tears and briefly tell what in our last and fatal night befell.
He explains, the Greeks hid behind a small island near the Trojan shoreline. Those in the city came out to find the large wooden horse. The first to say that it should be brought into the city was a certain Thymides. Yet, a priest named Laocoon warns against it. He is quoted as saying,
Think you the foes have left your coasts? And are Ulysses' art not better known? This hollow fabric either must enclose within its blind recess secret tests, surely some design, by fraud or force. Trust not their presence, nor admit the horse.
Uncertain as to what to do, a captive is questioned. This one had intentionally allowed himself to be captured exactly for the purpose of fooling the Trojans. Describing his words, Aeneas first says,
Hear how well the Greeks their wiles disguised. Behold how a single person encapsulates a nation. He stared and rolled his haggard eyes around, then said,
Alas, what earth remains, what sea is open to receive unhappy me? Despised among foes, abandoned without allies.
Subsequently, this captive describes his alleged past. He says that his name is Polymedes and that he is a victim of Ulysses. Somehow, it is not clear to me, the Ithacon hero slandered and killed his father. He explains that the war had been too arduous for the Greeks. They
resolved to raise the siege and to return. And, had the gods permitted, they had gone. But ever the wintry seas and southern winds impeded their sails from aiming home.
Since they were stuck, a Grecian prophet divined that since they had killed an innocent virgin, Iphigenia, to gain favorable wind for the voyage to Troy, now they had to likewise kill a Greek to gain passage back to Greece. Ulysses, allegedly, proposed Polymedes for the sacrifice, which is why he fled to Troy and willingly made himself a captive. These lies are convincing. They unbind him, and he continues explaining that Athena abandoned the Greeks because of how Ulysses and Diomed sacked her temple. Another seer, Calchas, proposed leaving the wooden horse as a gift. In that manner, they will be able to sail back and later, perhaps, return. The captive emphasizes that
if your profane hands violate the gift, Minerva will ensure your town burns.
What is even more convincing is that a pair of giant, monstrous sea snakes appear. These devour Laocoon, the priest who argued against accepting the horse, and then the snakes move to rest at the feet of a statue of Athena. Surely, the message of this element in the story must be, if the gods do not favor you, there is no hope of avoiding doom. The poet sings.
Amazement seizes all. The people outcry. Proclaims Laocoon justly doomed to die, whose hand the will of Pallas had withstood, and dared to violate the sacred wood.
The town not only pulls the large offering into the city, but begins celebrating their triumph. I found curious that the only mention of the cursed lover of Apollo was
Cassandra cried, and cursed the unhappy hour, foretold our fate. But by the gods' decree, all heard, but none chose to believe.
She will be mentioned again during the ensuing battle. After the celebration and much drinking, Aeneas speaks of himself when he says,
Was in the dead of night when sleep prepares, our bodies worn with toils, our minds with cares, when Hector's ghost before my sight appears. A bloody shroud he seemed, and bathed in tears.
The fallen prince warns Aeneas of what is occurring, of how men hidden inside the horse are now rampaging through the streets and opening the city's gate. The spirit advises Aeneas not to attempt saving the city. It tells him to attempt saving himself. Yet, the hero does not flee. Rather, he sets out to wake other soldiers and find weapons. Of the heroes he encounters, perhaps the worthiest of mention is a certain Charybdis. He was Cassandra's groom, and he becomes the party's leader. Much occurs, I will not describe all. It seems that they started outside the city. They make their way to the Grecian ships and take some of their weapons. Because of their attire, they are at times confused as enemies by the population. Once inside the city, they find Cassandra is being taken. Charybdis fights for her and many die in the ensuing battle. Aeneas is quick to indicate that he survives not because of lack of honor or cowardice.
Witness, ye heavens, I live not by my fault. I strove to have deserved the death I sought.
He goes as far as the city's palace, aiming to rescue Priam, the king. With the aid of new warriors, they kill many of those trying to loot the royal house. Herein enters Achilles. He is described as a monstrous human. Wielding an axe, he breaks through their barricades. Of Priam, Aeneas describes him as
Loaded, not armed, he creeps along with pain, despairing of success, ambitious to be slain.
the queen, Hecuba, calls to him, begging him to hide or flee rather than seek death. She says to him as he picks up a weapon,
These times want other aids. Were Hector here? Even Hector now in vain, like Priam, would appear.
The Prince of Phthia then kills Priam's son before the sight of his parents. The king cries out lamenting his son's death, and the invincible warrior responds by pushing a spear through the king's heart. I must quote,
He, who the scepter of all Asia swayed, whom monarchs like domestic slaves obeyed. On the bleak shore he now rests abandoned, a headless carcass and a nameless corpse.
I cannot avoid opining that this notion is what made Scipio the Elder cry as he stood beside burning Carthage. The message of the whole myth, whether Iliad or this epic poem, is not so much justifying or glorifying vainglory and the pursuit of power. Rather, they decry as they viscerally indicate the meaninglessness of all such searches. Even such a once powerful king meets a bloody end. Aeneas describes his horror and fear at seeing the death of his king. He now finds himself alone in the palace. All his allies are gone. He catches sight of Helen, Menelaus's wife and Paris' lover, and he says,
That common bane of Greece and Troy I found. Trembling with rage, the strumpet I consider, resolved to give her guilt the due reward.
He continues by questioning whether it would indeed be moral or just to kill a defenseless woman.
Shall she her kingdom and her friends review, in state attended with a captive crew, while unrevenged the good old Priam falls, and Grecian fires consume the Trojan walls?
Before acting, however, the recently deceased spirit of his mother appears before him. She tells him that this murder would be fruitless. Instead, he must now flee with the aim of protecting his own child, wife, and father. She tells him not to hate Helen or Paris. Divinity is responsible for Troy's ruin. When he returns home, he finds his family. His son, as mentioned in the first book, is called Ascanius or Iulus. His father is named Anchises, and his wife is named Creusa. His father, distraught by the death of his wife, is bent on finding death himself. As the older man leaves to fight the Greeks, Aeneas feels obliged to follow. It is quite heart-wrenching as Creusa begs the men to stay and survive. Then, a most peculiar thing occurs. Aeneas says,
Strange to relate, from young Iulus' head a lambent flame arose, which gently spread around his brows and on his temples fed.
As they wonder about the meaning of this surely divine sign, Anchises deduces that it must mean that it is imperative that the child lives. A lightning bolt is seen streaking across the sky, and they conclude that it shows them, as if it were an arrow, the path they must take in their flight. I must note that the image is not far from the later Christian invention of the divine halos carried by the saints and favorites. Jocularly, the grandfather's mentality completely changes. He now says,
Keep, O my country gods, our dwelling place, and guard this relic of the Trojan race. This tender child. These omens are your own, and you can yet restore the ruined town.
Aeneas quickly packs all that he can. He gathers various bystanders and servants to join them in the journey. I must deduce that they are currently not within the city, but it isn't clear. Either way, he tells all that they are heading towards an old, ruined temple of Demeter. Alas, in the journey, Creusa, Aeneas' wife, somehow is left behind. She gets lost, and when they arrive at their destination, Aeneas expresses his loss as he says,
This was the fatal blow that pained me more, that all I felt from ruined Troy before.
Therefore, he returns from whence they came. When he arrives at his house, it lies in ruins, burning. He continues his search and returns to the palace. He calls Creus's name, but only her spirit appears. Yes, his wife has been killed. She tells him that.
Nor tears, nor cries can give the dead relief. Desist, my beloved, don't indulge your pain. You bear no more than what the gods ordain.
What is more, she has him take counsel in knowing that she will not be a slave to any proud Grecian dame or lustful lord. He tries to hug her spirit, but she vanishes as he reaches for her. When he returns to where he had left his son and father, he finds that more refugees have gathered. They give him command, and he instructs them to first rest and later build a fleet to carry them away. Of course, in the next book their journey begins. We already know that later they crash in Carthage, where they meet Dido, the queen, but their journey to Carthage, which is merely a temporary stop, is nearly as perilous and filled with wonder as the Odyssey.
Although great suffering justifies foregoing your duty to the world, the pain should only strengthen the duty to yourself.
Book 3. The Trojan Odyssey. In the previous book, Troy was captured. In the process, Aeneas not only lost his wife, but also found signs that his son might have a divine purpose. Now he is the leader of a group of refugees. He tells the group to quickly build some ships, and they all set sail in search of a new home. The first land they encounter is in Thracia. Initially, they are satisfied with this location. Aeneas traces where their future walls and streets will be. While they build a small altar and aim to adorn it with vegetation, the hero describes that.
I pulled a plant, with horror I relate, a prodigy so strange and full of fate. I tore the fibrous roots, and from the wound, dark red blood squirted out of the ground.
He pulled some more and more until finally a voice spoke.
Why do you rend apart my buried body? O spare the corpse of thy unhappy friend. The blood that pours from this living tree, once pumped through Trojan veins. Flee at once this unhospitable shore. My fate is a warning, for I am Polydor.
The poet explains that Polydor was the youngest child of Priam. During the war, the king of Troy had hired a man in Thracia to protect this child in case the city was taken. This same man treacherously decided to kill the young boy and stole the money. Alas, now the boy's spirit is tied or fused with the plants and trees. The whole party of survivors is appalled by the malady of the land. A land wherein the vegetation bleeds the blood of the Trojan prince. As a result, they perform an appropriate funeral for the child and vote to leave and attempt finding another location to make their new home. Subsequently, they arrive at the island of Delos. Later, in real history, this will be an Athenian possession. For a time, the island served as the center or capital of the defensive alliance against Persia. Either way, the poet has it that the island was already a sacred site. In this little island, the survivors find a priest. Aeneas asks for counsel or prophecy, and the oracle reveals.
Undaunted youths, go your mother earth, the land where your ancestors were birthed. Be born again on the soil that was your cradle. Only there the fates would allow you to settle. Through the wide world the Aeneas house shall reign, and children's children shall the crown sustain.
Alas, as most prophecies, the meaning or message is up for debate. The hero's father, Anchises, argues that the oracle must mean the island of Crete. The father explains that Crete was the Trojan original home, and it, the island, is currently free of any tyrants. Therefore, they all sail for Crete, and when they arrive, they begin settling a new city. They progress until
the grass was parched, and the corn was blighted. Invisible vapors choked the wholesome air. Bodies fell unconscious, cursed by the plague.
Alas, the pandemic convinces them that they must continue their journey. Aeneas therefore returns to Delos and describes how Apollo, the god, spoke directly to him. The deity said,
"A land there is, Hesperia called of old. The soil is fruitful, and the natives bold. The Oenotrians held it once, by later fame. Now called Italia, from the leader's name."
It turns out that Italia, not Crete allegedly, is the original home of the Trojans. When he is told, Aeneas' father admits his error as he says,
"Such things, and more, Cassandra foretold. I am reliving in my mind how she spoke. That Troy reborn in Italy would prosper. In Latin lands, but who then considered? Oh, whoever listened to her maddening lessons?"
The party sails again and, conflicted by a storm, they arrive on a Greek island. Herein they are tormented by a group of harpies. The poet describes the flying monsters and how these steal their food. It reminds me of what happens to Phineas and Jason and the Argonauts. Of course, on this channel you may also learn about Apollonius of Rhodes' epic poem. In this story, the Trojans try to fight the winged creatures to no avail until the harpies' leader, a certain Celino, says,
"What? Not contented with our oxen slain? Dare you with heaven and impious war maintain, and drive the harpies from their native reign?"
Surprisingly, it is the flying beasts that are offended. They see the humans as invaders trespassing on their territory. Therefore, the harpies' leader warns that she will take eternal vengeance on the Trojan refugees. Although worried by the curse, the party once again sets sail. They pass by several Greek cities until they make harbor at a certain city named Chaunia. Herein, of all people, they find Andromache. This was the captive wife of Hector. It turns out that she has now gained her freedom. She explains to the refugees that at first, she was the forced concubine of Neoptolemus, Achilles' son. However, when he chose to marry a daughter of Helen, she herself married a fellow Trojan slave, a certain Helenus. And so, they lived in relative tranquility until Orestes killed Achilles' child. It will be remembered from Euripides' The Trajan Women that Orestes felt that Neoptolemus had stolen his wife. Either way, somehow, it is not clear to me. This death resulted in the slaves gaining their freedom, and also, somehow, incredibly, they now rule over the city of Chaunia. I guess, perhaps, the death of the king left a power vacuum wherein Andromache was able to gain a piece of freedom for herself. Like I said, the poet is not very clear on the details. It is as if he assumes that everyone knows about how, let me call it, social mobility tends to happen. Indeed, as Adam Smith explains, in darker times inheritance is stressed, but in reality, the children of the wealthy have a tougher time remaining wealthy. The refugees stay in the city for a couple of days. Aeneas asks the local seer to tell them about their upcoming voyage to Italy. The priest says that it is against divinity's will for him to reveal all, but he will mention the most important pieces of information. He tells the party to avoid, at all costs, disembarking in southern Italy. Likewise, they must not attempt crossing the space between the peninsula and the island of Sicily. They must sail around Sicily to get to central Italy. The reasons for this are, first, that southern Italy is filled with Greek cities that will be foes. Second, that a ship-destroying creature, a sea monster, lies in waiting at the passage between Italy and the island. This seer also mentions that Aeneas must gather the Sibyl books. These are the books which will foretell the future of Rome. These books were a real historical tool of the Roman Senate. They were surely an invention, as they were used only when panic seized the city and religion was needed to justify or validate an unpopular or seemingly dangerous course of action. According to Dionysius of Halicarnassus, the Sibyl books were gained during the tyrannical reign of Tarquinius. Back to the poem, in a moving scene, as the refugees depart, Andromache, the former wife of Hector, bestows many gifts upon the party. She says to Aeneas' son,
"Thou callest my lost Astyanax to mind. In thee his features and his form I find."
This whets the eyes of anyone who remembers Euripides' play. As they sail, there is a description of the night sky and the various constellations. As the sun rises, the poet sings,
It was when the rising morn with rosy light adorns the skies and puts the stars to flight, when we from far like bluish mists descry the hills and then the plains of Italy.
They make a stop on a Sicilian shore where they make various offerings to the gods. It is said that certain signs indicate the land is caught in an arduous war. I should note that the religious rituals were as the priest in Andromache's city ordered. These are, I am guessing, the same rituals that the Romans ever continued until Christianity's invasion. Sailing once more, the Trojans arrive at the channel between Italy and Sicily. Herein they encounter the ship-destroying monster, Charybdis, and, avoiding it, continue to make their way round the island. Eventually, they catch sight of a lone figure on a desolate shore. It is a poor castaway that beckons their aid. When they approach, it is clear that this is a Greek, one of those that attacked Troy, but he explains.
I offer but the air that surrounds us. Nonetheless, O Trojans, take me hence. It is true, I am Greek, and I freely admit. With my peers your lost home I besieged. For such demerits if my death be due, no more for this abandoned life I sue. Only this favor my tears wish to obtain. Kill me quickly, do not leave me maimed.
Moved by pity of the lone man, Aeneas asks him to explain how he ended up in such a condition. He says that his name is Achaemenides and that he was a soldier of Odysseus. He was with the great hero when they accidentally encountered Neptune's son, the Cyclops. This allows the poet to describe the famed scene of how Ulysses and his men crippled the monster by blinding his single eye. No sooner had the castaway told his story than the very Cyclops appeared in the distance. Yikes! The man had been accidentally abandoned when the party of Greeks fled, and he had since then been living in hiding from the monstrous, now blind, one-eyed giant. The Trojans accept him as they all flee likewise. He becomes the fleet's guide as he shows them the path around Sicily. They pass by many shores and towns. At one moment, in an unexplained manner, through old age, Aeneas' father breathes his last breath. This is the end of the story that the hero is relating. The scene returns to Dido's palace. Aeneas expresses how grateful he is for the Carthaginians' welcome. Although here ends this book, know that in the next book we'll focus on the eternal renowned tragic and fatal love. Don't miss it.
Since future happiness is never safe, ever make sure you enjoy the present.
Book 4, Love and Betrayal. This book begins with the lines.
But anxious cares already seized the queen. She fed within her veins a flame unseen. The hero's valor, acts, and birth inspire her soul with love and stoke her secret fire.
The hero is Aeneas. The acts are the manner he led the escape from Troy and how he seeks a new hope for his people. It is the queen of Carthage, Dido, that has these feelings. It must be remembered, unbeknownst to her, by Venus' instructions, Cupid took part in seeding her emotions. Feeling this way, the queen seeks the counsel of her younger sister, Anna. She explains to her that she had vowed, after the pain that resulted from her previous love, to never love again. What is more, she is uncertain on whether it would be appropriate to abandon the vows to her now deceased husband. Yet, her sister insists that she move past the prior pains. That she has a duty to her people to produce a noble child to bequest her power to. In the end, the princess tells the queen to continue as she is, to bide her time and wait for a favorable occasion to actualize her passion. Virgil takes the opportunity to describe a religious offering that the two women make for the fulfillment of the queen's love. I found this noteworthy as such descriptions must be very useful material to any cultural historian. Unfortunately, I will not describe it. Instead, know that the poet provides many details on such things. Truly, his writing is a great cultural record. Subsequently, Dido guides Aeneas across town, tempting him to stay and make a home. Jocularly, she asks him time and time again to redescribe his feats and adventures. In the meantime, however, Because she is so distracted, all new construction of the city ceases. Remember, Carthage is a new town that Dido has only recently founded. The pause in the town's construction reveals to Hera, Zeus' jealous wife, that Venus has intervened. The poet describes how the goddess of marriage approaches the goddess of love and says to her,
"High praises, endless honors, you have won, and mighty trophies, with your worthy son. 2 gods a silly woman have undone. Your Trojan with my Tyrian let us join. So, Dido shall be yours, Aeneas mine. 1 common kingdom, 1 united line. Elissa shall a Dardan lord obey, and lofty Carthage for a dowry convey."
Venus responds joyfully. However, she warns that Zeus may interfere. After all, the king of the gods intends for Aeneas to settle Rome, and he wishes Rome to rule the whole world. Nonetheless, the 2 goddesses concoct a plan. They figure that while the 2 mortals are out in the countryside, Hera will bring a rainstorm that will force them to take cover in a secluded cave. Here and Venus will have prepared their nuptial bed. No doubt, things occur as the goddesses will. I should note, previous to the storm, the 2, along with a party of people, were in an animal chase or hunt. The writer extensively describes, which I also reckon is a valuable piece of cultural trivia. Either way, it is jocular as, when they hide in the cave appointed to them by the divinities, the poet sings.
Then first the trembling earth the signal gave, and flashing fire enlightened all the cave. From this ill-omened hour in time arose debate and death, and all succeeding woes.
Yes, alas, in the midst of such bliss there is the foreboding of a doom. The earth shakes. Curiously, there are several references to the idea of shame, that it is shameful for the queen to have such relations without marriage. Included is found a very philosophical and poetic description of gossip, how rumor grows and moves exponentially and unseen, how hearsay often mixes falsehood into the truth. By scandals, unseen powers, news reaches as far as Tyre, the home city of Carthage. Herein the man that Dido avoided, the murderer of her former husband, hears the news and is enraged by it. He cannot believe that the princess, now queen, would flee from him and instead join with a refugee that has no home at all. It is through the tyrant's curses that Zeus learns what has occurred. He looks down and verifies. As Aphrodite predicted, he is very angry. The king of the gods sends Mercury, his trusted messenger, to instruct, to oblige, to force the Trojan hero to abscond from his newfound love. The divine herald can do this because he has the power of the word. The mere sound of his voice changes mortals' opinions. I wish I had that power. I find curious how much of Mercury's flight is described, rather scenic. It includes a metamorphosis, but I find it irrelevant. Eventually he tells Aeneas,
"Degenerated man, thou woman's property, what makest thou here? These foreign walls and Tyrian towers to rear, forgetful of thy own? What means thy lingering in the Libyan land? Your duty lies in benefiting your youthful heir. The promised crown let young Ascanius wear, to whom the Ausonian scepter and the state of Rome's imperial name is owed by fate."
Aeneas is distraught. He cannot avoid the instructions but pains to leave Dido. He concludes that he must leave in secrecy. I think this is rather cowardly. The hero should not flee in this manner. Regardless, despite his efforts.
Soon the queen perceives the thin disguise. What arts can blind a jealous woman's eyes?
She confronts Aeneas and the Trojan admits his intentions. She falls into a tirade of fury. She describes how much she loves him. She complains of how she has now damaged her name by being with him. Likewise, how he is not even leaving her with a future child. She is not yet pregnant. She will not have anything to console her loss. Jocularly, Aeneas defends himself, claiming it is divinity's will. I wonder, how many have tried such a defense throughout human history? As should be expected, this explanation only further enrages the queen. She says,
"False as thou art, and, more than false, forsworn. Not sprung from noble blood, nor goddess born, but hewn from hardened entrails of a rock. Justice is fled, and truth is now no more. I saved the shipwrecked exile on my shore. With needful food, his hungry Trojans fed. I took the traitor to my throne and bed. I rave, I rave. A god's command he pleads, and makes heaven accessory to his deeds.
In the end, she tells him to part as he wishes, but curses him and wishes him the worse. The poet describes how all the Trojans set to work preparing to sail. In the meantime, Dido continues to be distraught and most depressed. At one point, she sends her sister to beg him to stay a little longer, but once again Aeneas refuses. Therefore, most tragically, the heartbroken queen decides on death. She concludes that she must keep her intentions secret. She pretends that she wishes to arrange a most powerful magical artifice. She claims that she may, with magic, regain the hero's heart. However, all she wishes is a dramatic stage in which she may kill herself. I should not underemphasize these passages. At one point, her psychological condition is compared with that of other mythic heroes. She sees visions and suffers a great malady. Eventually, on one lonely night, she asks herself,
"Shall I with this ungrateful Trojan go? Forsake an empire, and attend a foe? Himself I refuged, and his train relieved. It is true, but am I sure to be received? What force have I, but those whom scarce before I drew reluctantly from their native shore? Will they again embark at my desire? Once more sustain the seas, and quit their second tire? Had I continued free, and still my own, avoiding love, I had not found despair, but shared with savage beasts the common air. Like them, a lonely life I might have led, not mourned the living, nor disturbed the dead."
Yes, thus are her thoughts. Concluding that she cannot leave with him, and likewise that she cannot make him stay, she regrets love and continues to plan her own death. In the meantime, during the same night as the prior, Mercury once again speaks to Aeneas and warns him that he best leave at once, in the middle of the darkness. The reasoning being that the queen's pain may turn to violent vengeance. The Trojan does as he was indicated, and when the sun rises per Dido, seeing their ships gone, pains more than ever. At one moment, indeed, she speaks of sending ships against them. Briefly, she wishes to kill all the refugees. Yet, in the end, the most as if historically significant of her vengeful declarations is spoken.
"Now, and from hence, in every future age, let memory strengthen and supply the rage. Our arms, our seas, our shores, opposed to theirs, and the same hate ever nurtured by all our heirs."
If you did not know, Carthage was the most historically epic enemy of Rome. According to this mythic poem, the enmity arose from broken love. Yes, alas, the strongest hate arises from love. The religious ceremony she had prepared is arranged. To the surprise of all, let me skip the details. It ends with her driving Aeneas' sword into her breast. All the attendants panic, the whole city laments. Her sister is most distraught. The whole is most tragic. Curiously, her death is not instantaneous. She pains and suffers until Hera, the goddess, intervenes and puts her at ease. I should quote her sister as she says,
"One sword had served us both, one common tomb. At once thou hast destroyed thyself and me, thy town, thy senate, and thy colony."
As a common practice, Anna cuts a lock of her sister's hair while she lays her corpse to rest. Believe it or not, the Aeneid doesn't end here. Aeneas has to travel to the underworld, and the Trojan refugees have to survive an attack by the natives of Italy. Don't miss it. Also, on this channel you may find a summary of Christopher Marlowe's theater play titled Dido, the Queen of Carthage.
Loving the past or hoping the future are each to resign living the present.
Suicide is found by either resigning love of self, or of all besides.
Book 5, Funeral Olympics. Remember that in the prior book Dido killed herself after the hero chose to abandon her and continue his voyage to central Italy. At the beginning of this book, Aeneas, sailing away from Carthage, looks back and sees a rising column of smoke. He suspects that it might be a funeral ceremony. He considers what Dido might have done to herself. Nonetheless, although hurt by his own sense of obligation, he continues his journey to settle New Troy, the city of Rome. Soon afterwards, a storm arises, forcing the migrants to disembark on a Sicilian shore. Most curiously, herein they encounter Aeneas. His background is not explained, although he is a significant agent in Trojan mythology. I should let you know that, according to myth, he founded the Sicilian city of Segesta. Either way, Aeneas decides to hold a proper funeral ceremony for his father. You will remember from the third book, the Troyan Odyssey, that Anchises, Aeneas' father, died on their way to Carthage. It turns out that the ceremony must contain athletic games and religious sacrifices. The whole is as if a description of Rome's cultural practices. Meaning, according to the poem, herein was when the Romans' funeral customs were established. After the religious animal sacrifices and some short words by the spirit of Anchises, the first game they host is a rowing contest. There are 4 boats, and it appears that each boat only has 1 rower. The whole is described with much detail and action. It is quite a prolonged description. One of the rowers crashes his ship, for example. In the end, all contestants are granted a gift. I guess they believed in the now decried trophies for mere participation, LOL. Curiously, at this moment there is a quick reference to Ganymede. Seemingly at random and without any backdrop, the beautiful man is swept into the sky by a large bird. I know that, because of his physical beauty, Zeus turns him into a cup-bearer at Mount Olympus. The next sport in the athletic competition is running. The prizes are announced before competing. I must make clear that I find the whole rather trivial and therefore boring. Let it be known that the runner in the lead falls moments before crossing the finish line. Therefore, he loses and is sore about it. A dispute about it is brewing, but the Trojan leader pacifies the situation by giving prizes to all. Again, prizes for merely participating. Of course, presently most people would think it improper to host an athletic competition as part of a funeral. Either way, next comes boxing. Herein a young dares fights an older Entellus. A point is made about the gauntlets of Entellus, their frightful composition and size. The fight is described in great detail, and in the end the elder defeats the younger. Following comes archery. This is, thankfully, unlike the modern practice. Although there is no reference to the weight of the bows, I am sure those bows would have been difficult to pull and aim. Also, they shoot at a moving and fluttering target, a tied-up pigeon. Poor thing, able to fly and dodge, but not escape. Yet, luckily for the bird, one of the shooters accidentally strikes the rope and the bird flies free. Not having a target, one of the contestants shoots an arrow in the air and it, the arrow, seems to catch fire and fly away into space. This was initially considered an evil omen, but Aeneas finds a pleasing interpretation for it. It is most curious, almost paradoxical, that the poet lets it be known that the Trojan leader is pretending, deceiving, simply making up an interpretation for a religious enigma. The last ceremony is a procession and as if military training of the children. All the youths gather and march as if in an army. They perform various coordinated maneuvers and mock fights. I should quote,
This game, these carousels, Ascanius taught, and building Alba, to the Latin brought. From this ceremony imperial Rome received the game, which Troy, the youth the Trojan troop, they name.
Meaning, this was a practice long held by the Romans, and it was clearly brought by the Trojans. While all the priors occurring, envious Hera, the goddess, plans a new calamity. She sends Iris, her trusted messenger, to convince a group of Trojan women to set the ships on fire and thus force an end to their seemingly endless journey. The deity tells the women,
Now 7 revolving year are wholly run. Since this unprosperous voyage we begun. Shall we no more the Trojan walls renew? Or streams of some substitute Simois view? Haste, join with me, the unhappy fleet consume.
Some women do as they were instructed. Hearing the fire roar, the children first arrive to question their mothers. Aeneas and most of the Trojans work to put out the flames. The hero shouts a prayer and divinity responds by making rainfall. Only 4 ships are destroyed, but a certain Knots counsels that not all should continue. He says that those who are too weak or old to handle the subsequent hardships should remain. He says that those who stay may form a town named after Aeneas' father, a town named Acesta. This will later be known as Segesta. That night, the spirit of the father appears before the son and tells him to follow the previously mentioned counsel. He warns that arriving in Italy there will be hardships and war. What is more, he tells him that after he finds the priestess that writes the books of Sibyls, he himself, Aeneas, must descend into Hades. Exactly why he must do the latter is not clear. But the father says that he should find him as his spirit lives pleasantly in Elysium. All the Trojans agree with the plan and set about founding a new town for those that will remain. They elect a king and create a temple. When the party with Aeneas sets sail, initially, the seas are gentle and easy on their ships. Venus is quoted speaking to Neptune as she asks him to look after her son. The god of the sea agrees as he is angry at Hera for intruding into her realm. However, the jealous queen of the gods is not finished with her challenges. One night she sends the deity of sleep to trap the ship's pilot. This one is named Palinurus, and he attempts to resist the power of sleep, but eventually is taken and even falls out into the ocean. Luckily, Aeneas wakes and keeps the ship from crashing into some rocks. The pilot, however, is not saved. He is lost, but will be mentioned again, once the hero is traveling in the underworld. Here ends this book. The next one will be the one that most inspired or influenced Dante's famous Divine Comedy. In this case, an ancient and now forgotten poet will give Aeneas a tour of Hades' realm.
You will only know if you have suffered when you pity those that will, are and have not yet suffered as you have.
Book 6, Journey into Hades. At the beginning of this book, the remaining Trojan refugees finally arrive in Italy. They search and quickly find the Sibyl's home. As might be imagined, the prophetess lives in a cave. In it, Aeneas finds all sorts of images or visions that depict various scenes from all of Greek mythology. Special focus is paid to the myth of Theseus, Minos, and the Minotaur. This is best learned from Plutarch's biographies. The carrier and writer of the Book of Prophecies is named Deepobe. She is mystical in appearance and seems to suffer from spasms of physically transforming episodes. Aeneas asks her for aid, and I find most curious the description of how Apollo as if possesses her. Consider the lines.
Struggling in vain, impatient of her load, and laboring underneath the ponderous god, the more she strove to shake him from her breast. With more and far superior force he pressed, commands his entrance, and without control, usurps her organs and inspires her soul. Now, with a furious blast, the 100 doors open of themselves, a rushing whirlwind roars within the cave, and Sibyl's voice restores.
Perhaps I am projecting my own biases or temptations, but the description seems to verge on the sexual. It is jocular. The priestess says that there will be war, including an enemy much like Achilles, but in the end, the migrants will find aid from an unlikely source, a Grecian town. Aeneas says that he is not daunted by the challenges. Instead, he insists that he must travel to Hades. He argues that if Orpheus, Pollux, and even Theseus could do it, so can he. The prophetess warns that
the gates of hell are open night and day. Smooth the descent, and easy is the way. But return, and view the cheerful skies. In this the task and mighty labor lies.
Oh, what joy! This is a rich aphoristic boulder. Deepobe tells the Trojan to seek out some special tree and gather from it a golden bough. This means a tree branch or stem whose leaves are golden. He is to give this golden bough to Persephone, Hade's wife, once they are in the underworld. It will gain him her favor, and she will therefore allow him to travel safely. When him and his friend Achates return to the other Trojans, they find that a certain Maecenas has died. His dead counsels humility. Yes, alas, it is explained, Maecenas, proud of his skill with the trumpet and the ability to rally his fellow soldiers, challenged Triton, a sea titan, to a musical match. The Titan, infuriated by Maecenas' hubris, killed the Troyan. They all agree to hold a funeral. This one is unlike the one described in the 5th book. This one does not contain any athletic games. Instead, they pray and honor the dead as they cremate his body. Once again, that is meant as an explanation of the origin of Rome's cultural practices.
The breathless body, thus bewailed, they lay, and fire the pile, their faces turned away. Such reverend rites their fathers used to pay.
After the funeral fire, Aeneas prays to his mother, the goddess Venus, for help in fulfilling the task set by the prophetess. As he prays, he sees 2 doves that he interprets are messengers from his mom. He follows these birds and finds the tree in question. Therein he gathers the golden branch. Along with the prophetess, the hero descends into a deep cavern. She does various rituals such as pouring wine and cutting a lock of her own hair. Even Hecate, the mythical, divine sorceress, is invoked. Several animals, many animals, are sacrificed. I wonder if this description was not, in part, based on the so-called religious mysteries that certain cults would perform. The whole is surely frightful and bordering on sacrilegious to the intended audience. Eventually, somehow, they arrive in Hades. Let me quote.
Just in the gate and in the jaws of hell, revengeful cares and sullen sorrows dwell, and pale diseases and repining age, want, fear, and famine's unresisted rage. Here pain, death, and his half-brother sleep. Forms terrible to view, their sentry keep.
There are other monsters, such as a hydra and a 100-handed Briareus. They arrive before the river Acheron. Here they find Charon transporting some souls to the other side of the river. The hero asks Deep Hope why some souls are ignored and left in the river. She explains that those who have not received the proper funeral are not carried. Thus, in this river, he sees many of his former friends. Most critical, the freshly arrived Palinurus. You will remember, this was the ship pilot that fell overboard as Hera forced him to sleep. The poor soul explains that as he floated for 3 days, he did manage to arrive in Italy after all. Aeneas wishes to help him, but he is not allowed. The prophetess does provide some soothing words.
This comfort of thy dire misfortune take. The wrath of heaven, inflicted for thy sake, with vengeance shall pursue the inhuman coast, till they propitiate thy offended ghost, and raise a tomb with vows and solemn prayer. And Palinurus name the place shall bear.
This is another explanation or connection for something that remains to this day. A religious mount on a western Italian shoreline. At one moment, while they cross Acheron, the river, the boatman angrily argues that they are not allowed in Hades. Yet, when the priestess shows him the gift they bring to Persephone, he succumbs and lets them pass. Next, they have to deal with Cerberus, the 3-headed dog. The prophetess reveals a poisoned cake that the dog eats and is therefore, by the drugs therein, brought to sleep. The first thing they encounter past the guard dog are those that I deduce died innocently or unjustly. These are newborn babies that surely had not yet accumulated any vice or sin. Also, wrongfully executed persons. Men that were cheated, betrayed, or slandered at the courts. Then there is Minos of all people, the mythic king of Crete. He plays a role similar to the Christian Saint Peter. He judges each passenger and determines their appropriate place or punishment in Hades. The poet says that the first punished, I think this means that they are the least punished of the punished, are those who committed suicide.
Fools, who, repining at their wretched state, and loathing anxious life, suborned their fate.
I find this curious and not altogether commendable. Surely, as Plutarch would have it, death is often better than life, and it is fools who live despite unhappiness or duty. It is tragic as one cannot avoid concluding that therein lies the evolutionary barrier to a species' intellect. LOL. Either way, instead of being granted a typical ghostly body like other souls, those who committed suicide are transformed into thorny, barren trees. They have no voice, and the only way they can communicate is by moving, which often breaks their branches. Horrible. Next are described those titled lovers. I reckon these, in some way, sinned because of love. The hero finds the likes of Phaedra, who made Theseus believe that his son had raped her. Pasiphae, who slept with a bull and thus gave birth to the Minotaur. Ceneus, whose myth, or reason for punishment, is not explained. Alas, Virgil might, possibly, be insinuating that he is punished because he transformed from a woman to a man. Alas, this is neither the place nor time to explain such an obscure myth. Also, I personally always question if someone during the Dark Ages might have adulterated the text. Lastly, among those punished as lovers is Dido, the former lover of Aeneas. She does not hear him when he tries to apologize and declare that he did love her. I should note, it is curious that these three are, or were, all women. The two living voyagers continue, and they find a field with many warriors. Most referenced are from the war in Troy. In particular, a child of Priam named Deiphobus. The image of this spirit is so mangled that he is barely recognizable. He explains that it was his wife that aided the Greeks hidden in the wooden horse perform their surprise ambush. By the way, his wife was Helen. She was forced to marry him after Paris was killed. Also, he was a great warrior as he killed many famed Greek heroes. In fact, he was key in killing Achilles. It is jocular how he describes his final moments as he was surprised sleeping in his bed.
Ulysses, basely born, first led the way, avenging powers, with justice if her prey, that fortune be their own another day.
Yes, I always find it curious how Ulysses is not altogether a moral agent. At least not in the Christian sense of the word. He is wily and treacherous, LOL. The poet says that Aeneas and the Trojan prince talk for a very long time. So long, in fact, that the prophetess breaks their conversation and obliges them to continue the journey. They enter a new section of Hades where the most horrific tortures thus far occur. Depope explains that
these are the realms of the unrelenting fate. An awful Adeimantus rules the state. He hears and judges each committed crime, inquires into the manner, place, and time.
Several of the punished are mentioned as examples. There's a certain Salmoneus that pretended to be a god, invented a device to mimic the sound of Zeus' thunder. The other examples are all of either mortals or titans that attempted to rape a goddess favored by Zeus. Their tortures differ. For example, there is a royal fury that withholds food from them. The priors are not the only damned. Consider the lines.
Vast is the throng of these, nor less the train of lustful youths, for foul adultery slain. Hosts of deserters, who their honor sold, and basely broke their faith for bribes of gold. All these within the dungeon's depth remain, despairing pardon and expecting pain.
Their tortures are varied, from burning to meaningless labor. Of course, this book inspired Dante, whom you may also learn about on this channel. The poet himself says that even if he had 100 tongues, he could not all relate. Skipping ahead, they reach the palace of Pluto and I guess therefore the fields of Elysium, the equivalent of heaven. It is curious as this poem may be understood as part of the religious evolution that led to much of Christianity. Remember, in Greek religion, originally, there was no Elysium or tortures in the afterlife. They present the gift they brought to Persephone and are allowed to continue. The souls in this region are all in bliss. They play sports, they sing, or are simply at joyous rest. A certain Musaeus and ancient poet becomes their temporary guide. There are all sorts of people here. As for whom is allowed to dwell here, consider the lines.
here patriots live, who, for their country's good, in fighting fields, were prodigal of blood. Priests of unblemished lives here make abode, and poets worthy of their inspiring God, and searching wits, of more mechanic parts, who graced their age with new invented arts.
Meaning, patriotic warriors, moral and honest clergymen, enlivening and profound writers, and humanitarian scientists. Yes, these are the ones that are rewarded in afterlife, a worthy heaven if you ask me. Eventually the hero encounters his father. They greet most joyously, but cannot embrace as the father is but a spirit with no touch or matter. Aeneas sees a place where a great multitude of souls are converging. He asks about it and is answered.
The souls that throng the flood are those to whom, by fate, our other bodies owed. In Lethe's lake they savor oblivion taste. Of future life secure, they relish without past.
Yes, according to Virgil, souls reincarnate into new bodies. Initially, Aeneas cannot believe what he is told. This is contrary to common Greco-Roman religion. Thus, Anchises, his father, explains much about the true nature of reality. Aside from the shape and composition of the cosmos, he seems to imply a singular mind, power, or soul that rules all. As such, Hades is a realm where the deceased is cleansed from the corrupting nature of matter. In the process, which takes over 1,000 years, they forget their previous life. Thus, when they are given a new body, they begin anew. As may be imagined, the more evil or wrong the person, the more cleansing needed, ergo the more punishment and pain. A few, a very few, may enter Hades pure and ready to return to life. Subsequently, they relate all the souls that will come into existence in the future, which is, of course, already passed by the time the poet writes. Beginning with a Silvius that will be a second child to Aeneas. This man will beget many Italian kings until the coming of Romulus. A temporal jump is made as the poet is quick to speak of Julius Caesar. I guess Caesar may only be second to Romulus, LOL. Let me quote.
The mighty Caesar waits his vital hour, impatient for the world, and grasps his promised power. Augustus, promised often, and long foretold, sent to the realm that Saturn ruled of old, born to restore a better age of gold. Africa and India shall his power obey.
The poet goes so far in his eulogy to Augustus that he says he conquered or ruled more than mythic Heracles and Dionysus. Returning in time, there is reference to some future Roman kings. He mentions Numa Pompilius, Tullus, and Brutus, the man who led the revolution that eventually turned Rome into a republic. This great man is commended for being willing to even kill his own sons in defense of democracy.
He dooms to death deserved, asserting public right. The consul, not the father, sheds the blood.
Camillus is referenced, Emilius conqueror of Greece is insinuated, Cato, the Gracchi, and lastly the Scipios. As such, this section is a bit of a history lesson. In the end, Aeneas cites a particularly divine figure. He asks about it and confusion ensues. It seems like Marcellus, the great general that combated Hannibal and conquered Syracuse. Yet, it is the son of Augustus who had the same name. Alas, the son of Augustus died young and therefore the empire lacked a proper heir. To end this book, Aeneas easily leaves the underworld, joins the Troyan on the Italian shore, and they all set sail heading further north.
The truth is that admission to hell is so cheap that the challenge is being sufficiently poor.
Book 7. Why Hera Hates Immigrants. The prior book ended with the Trojan refugees leaving a southwestern Italian shore and heading to central Italy where they intend to settle a new city. Along their journey, they pass by the island of Circe. You must remember that this is the witch that entrapped Odysseus for nearly 10 years. From afar, the Trojans can hear the roars and howls of various animals. These are all men that the sorceress has transformed. Luckily, Neptune intervenes and guides their boats by controlling the ocean's flow away from the evil hostess. The next morning, they arrive at the Tiber's mouth, their final destination. Curiously, as if beginning his book anew, Virgil invokes the aid of the muse, Erato, to help him relate the subsequent events. Doing so, the poet foreshadows that there will be war, tragic love, and many challenges. The narrative turns away from the Trojans and speaks of the native Italians. It turns out that central Italy has many rulers, many kings. Special focus is paid to a certain Latinus. The poet describes this man's ancestry and heritage. He has no surviving male children and only one daughter. This young woman is set to marry a prince from another Italian city, a prince named Turnus. The native king, Latinus, had been forewarned by several signs and prophesied about the coming of the Trojans. The first sign was an inundation of bees. The second was that his daughter's crown was brought to spontaneous combustion. The king's priests tell him that he must marry his daughter with the leader of the migrants. Let me quote what the seer says of the incoming Trojan leader.
His race, in arms, and arts of peace renowned. Not Latium shall contain, nor Europe bound. It is theirs whatever the sun surveys around.
Meaning, the Trojans, or the descendants of Aeneas, will rule the world. Returning to the arrival of the refugees, the poet describes how they disembarked, prepared a meal, and began forming a camp. I rather enjoyed Aeneas' line after he makes a brief prayer.
Enjoy the present hour. Adjourn the future thought.
It seems like a cynic refrain. Unfortunately, the early Christians adulterated the term cynic. It was one of the main Roman philosophies during the early and Middle Republic. Returning to the poem, Aeneas sends groups of boys or young men to explore and to bring gifts to every nearby city. Some of these arrive at the city of Latinus. The palace is extensively described, from images of Cronus to military ornament. There is reference to a certain Picus as the founder of the city. According to myth, this man incredibly rejected Circe's seductions and therefore, in punishment, she transformed him into a bird. When the boys speak to Latinus, they explain that the Trojans wish to make a new home. Of their words, let me quote.
We beg what you without want may spare. Simply share the common water and air. We ourselves will build our own mean abodes, fit to receive and serve our banished gods.
Latinus not only agrees to let them make their new homes, but also grows convinced that they are the visitors that were prophesied. Therefore, the king makes one request: that Aeneas marry his daughter. Wishing to court agreement, the king also gives the boys several horses and a chariot as gifts. Cheerful, the Trojan youths leave to tell Aeneas better news than what they could ever had hoped for. Not all is well, however. In the meantime, Hera looks down with envious eyes. The poet quotes her long monologue complaining about how she has not been able to destroy the Trojans. Eventually she concludes,
At least I can defer the nuptial day, and with protracted wars the peace delay. Another queen brings forth another brand, to burn with marriage fires another land. A second Paris, different only in name. His country will burn as he rekindles the flame.
It must be remembered that the princess was already promised to a native Italian. Is this story not, surely it is, an insinuation of why natives might scorn migrants, LOL. To fulfill her aim, Hera requests the aid of a most hideous fury, one that lives in Hades. Its name is Alecto, and it is funny how the poet describes her.
Even Pluto hates her misshapen shape. Her sister Furies fly her hideous face. So frightful are the forms the monster takes. So fierce the hissings of her speckled snakes.
The goddess gives this beast the duty of sowing hate and war in the hearts of all the natives. The beast first visits Amida, the princess who is already frustrated by the change in her appointed marriage. Virgil describes how the fury mounts the princess, injects her heart, and has her snakes crawl on her naked body. The princess rises and tells her father about her unhappiness. She wishes to marry Turnus, the native Latin. In her pleads, she mentions how Turnus, as most Italians, as most people everywhere, are also the descendants of foreigners. I rather like the insinuation in the lines.
No, all are foreign, in a larger sense. not born your subjects or derived from hence.
Since her father will not retract, the princess breaks out into a mad fury. She runs all over the palace and the city bewailing her condition. Eventually, she finds a group of dames and, beckoning the power of Dionysus, convinces them to join her in a so-called orgy.
If there be anyone here who dare maintain my right, nor think the name of mother vain, unbind your fillets, loose your flowing hair, and orgies and nocturnal rites prepare.
This notion of female Dionysian orgies is rather foreign to seemingly any contemporary culture. One would guess that Christianity utterly forbade such things, thus, they were forgotten. Either way, let it be known that there was not, necessarily, anything sexual in the frenzy, rebellion, or celebration. It was merely women drinking and partying by themselves without men. With the women leaving the town and entering the woods in protest, the Fury leaves to visit and likewise corrupt the heart of Turnus. Initially, the beast changes herself into the image of Hera, the goddess, and tells the warrior all about the Trojan War and how once again the Trojans wish to steal another bribe, his own. The man is not moved, however. Infuriated, the Fury returns to her natural appearance. Remember, she is so horrid that even Pluto, the king of Hades, finds her sickening. She mounts Turnus and sinks her hand deep into his heart. The result is that the young man is filled with rage and clamor for war. While Turnus begins the task of gathering troops and support for the coming struggle, it is Aeneas' son, Ascanius, that inadvertently triggers the conflict. Yes, alas, the youth foolishly breaks the native law and thus justifies Turnus' calls for war. The poet describes how, while hunting for wild stags, the youth killed a Latin pet. Yes, incredibly it is described that a family had a male deer as a pet. The family had reared the animal since it was young, and they are most grieved by its loss. The head of the household in question, a certain Tereus, being most angry at the murder of his pet deer, fights the Trojan youth and the group of children that accompany him. The Fury rises in the air and blows some sort of magic, most powerful horn. The sound of this instrument drives belligerence into the hearts of all the people of the region. Therefore, the minor conflict between the youths and the household of the murdered pet turns into a large battle where blood is shed and some are killed. I should mention, historically, pets have always been a source of conflict among humans. There is no shortage of stories, all over the world, of people that fight because of what began as an issue involving pets. LOL. The Fury returns to Hera, who congratulates her efforts and bids her to return to the underworld. The prior conflict ends indecisively. A large throng of Latins gathers at Latinus' court. The people all ask the king to declare war, but the king refuses. Curiously, herein the poet invents an origin to a most fundamental of Roman customs. He says,
"A solemn custom was observed of old, which the Latium held, and now the Romans hold. Before his temple stand, the dire abode, and the feared issues of the furious god. Base and bolts secure and keep the gate, and wary Janus doubly guards them closed. Then heaven's imperious queen shot down from high. At her approach the brazen hinges fly. The gates are forced and every falling bar, and like a tempest issues out the war."
Although many historians claim that the temple whose doors could only be opened when at war was a creation of Numa Pompilius, Virgil has it that this custom existed well before the founding of the city. Either way, as the king refused war, goddess Hera herself opened the doors and the armies began assembling. The native Latin force was comprised of 5 cities. The poet begs the aid of the muses to help him describe the marshalling and the most critical heroes. As such, this portion more than any prior is reminiscent of the Iliad. Many individuals are named. Too many for me to explain with any detail. Furthermore, it would not be essential to know such heroes in detail. Let me quote an example of the descriptions. Speaking of a certain Aventinus, the poet sings,
"His father's hydra fills his ample shield. 100 serpents hiss about the brims. The son of Hercules he justly seems, by his broad shoulders and gigantic limbs."
Know that all have their unique qualities. On one occasion, a pair of twins is mentioned. Another brings expert slingers that fight naked, without either armor or clothing. Some of these individuals come on chariot, others on horse, and others yet merely on foot. One of them is a priest that has mastered the use of poisons. One is referenced as the son of Hippolytus, therefore the grandchild of Theseus. However, most peculiar and worthy of note was a female warrior. Let me quote.
Last, from the Volscians fair Camilla came, and led her warlike troops, a warrior dame. Unbred to spinning, in the loom unskilled, she chose to be the nobler palace of combat. Men, boys, and women, stupid with surprise, wherever she passes, fix their wondering eyes. Longing they look, and gaping at the sight, devour her over and over with vast delight.
So much for any who may think that this tale, this poetic myth, would not be fit for a contemporary movie. LOL.
Although those who witness it become fearful, those who suffer it often grow fearless of pain.
Book 18, The Trojans Gather Allies. At the beginning of this book, there is a loose mention of how the Italians sent word to Diomedes asking him to join their efforts. You must remember that this is one of the key heroes from the Iliad. However, he is not mentioned again. Instead, the topic changes to the Trojans. Aeneas dreams that the river Tiber, as if it were a divinity, counsels him to seek alliance with a certain local city. The city that is referenced was founded by some Arcadians, the Trojans' Greek enemies. Yet, the deity is certain they will become their new allies. When Aeneas wakes up, he sees a sign, a cow with 30 babies in her brood, that confirms the veracity of his dream. The deity had told him that he would see such a thing, LOL. They travel by sea to the city in question and are greeted in a friendly manner. Aeneas tells their leader,
Your birth is Grecian, and your land my foe. From Atreus, though, your ancient lineage came, our founder Dardanus, as fame has sung, and Greeks acknowledge, from Electra sprung. Thus, from one common source our streams divide. Ours is the Trojan, yours the Arcadian side.
Their leader, a man named Evander, tells the Trojan that as a child he met Priam, the king of Troy. The elder man had been good to him, had given him a gift. Therefore, Evander invites him to a friendly dinner, and during the conversation Evander explains a local myth. He has it that Heracles once visited that land. Herein he defeated a monster known as Cacus.
Vulcan this plague begot, and, like his sire, he could black flakes of livid fire.
This beast stole some oxen from a local lord. Luckily, Heracles heard the captured animals cry out and discovered the beast's hidden cavern. The hero frees the oxen, kills the monster, and exhibits the corpse for the local villagers to admire.
The wondering neighborhood, with glad surprise, beheld his shagged breast, his giant size, his mouth that flames no more, and his extinguished eyes. From that auspicious day, with rites divine, we worship at the hero's holy shrine.
The cave where the combat took place is the same wherein, according to myth, the female wolf later nurtured Romulus and Remus. So, this cave, which I believe it is now lost, is doubly important. It is the location of a Herculean feat and the home of the twins that founded Rome. The poet then describes a religious ceremony held in honor of Hercules. He quotes the song that is sung during the ceremony. It describes many of the great deeds of the hero. Following, Evander describes the origin of life in Italy. He says that the peninsula was populated from the beginning. Humans did not migrate into it. Humans emerged in it from natural processes. Surely this understanding is an influence of Lucretius. The Epicurean poet had it that humans sprung from mutated or aberrant plant seeds. Paradoxically, after the appearance of man, Saturn, Cronus, arrived and brought civilization and culture to the Italian people. The tale ends with the arrival of the original Arcadians that settle the present city. Subsequently, there is mention of other special, mythical locations. These are places such as the Tarpeian Rock that we know got its name from later, historical events. When the ceremony ends and night falls, Virgil changes the scene to Olympus. Venus is speaking to her husband, Vulcan. She is quoted as saying,
"While cruel fate conspired with Grecian powers to level with the ground the Trojan towers, did not request aid in finding my son a home, nor did the succor of thy skill implore, nor urged the labors of my lord in vain. A sinking empire you need not sustain. But now, by Jove's command, and fate's decree, my son's prodigy is destined to reign Italy. With humble suit I beg for you skillful art, your propitious power that rules my heart."
Of course, as she often did, the goddess is manipulating her husband. She offers sexual pleasure, and the god of smithing cannot resist. The poet describes how they embrace and make love. Afterwards, Vulcan does as his wife asked and travels to a sacred island where all his workmen are found working. These are, for the most part, Cyclopes skilled in foundry. It is jovial to read how they work. Let me quote the master craftsman as he tells them.
Create arms for a hero, forge weapons that require your strength, your speed, and all your shaping fire.
The whole reads like a movie montage as the Cyclopes even sing as they hammer. LOL. Throughout the book, at every sunrise and every sunset, the poet vividly describes the scene. It is always a new description and always most poetic. Either way, on a new day, when Aeneas and Evander meet, the latter tells the former about a nearby town that will also join their efforts. Herein is found a defense of liberty and democracy. Yes, Evander explains.
What words can paint those execrable times? The subject's sufferings and the tyrant's crimes. That blood, those murderers, O ye gods, replace on his own head and on his impious race. The people's patience, tired, no longer bore. The despot devil, but with courage revolt.
Yes, these people were afflicted with a tyrant. They overthrew, but failed to kill, the man. The despot had fled to Turnus' court, and he still lives awaiting the opportunity to regain his throne. As such, this town, now free, are natural enemies of the Trojans' new foes. Evander explains that thus far an oracle has withheld them from further war. It was prophesied that the free people had to wait for a foreign leader to lead them against their former ruler. Of course, Aeneas is this foreign leader. He stands ready to accept these people and incorporate them into his party. The former tyrant is named Mezentius. Also, is it not reminiscent of what happened to the Romans with Tarquin? Evander and Aeneas are interrupted by a divine sign. A thunder flicks across the sky and the Trojan understands.
Heaven calls me to the war. The expected sign is given of promised aid and arms divine. This omen gave when bright Vulcanian arms faded from force of steel by Stygian charms.
As such, they all prepare for the incoming battle. Evander cannot go as he is too old. He sends his son and begs divinity to either let him live to see his son return triumphantly, or to die not knowing that his son has fallen. Furthermore, there is reference to the women that stay behind. Crying with worry, they wave the troops goodbye. Along the way, Aphrodite presents herself to Aeneas and gives him the arms that Hephaestus crafted. He is impressed by their construction and ornamentation, especially the shield. It has very distinct decorations. On it are depicted famous scenes from the future history of Rome. First, there is a wolf tending twins, Romulus and Remus. Then, a depiction of the early city and the so-called rape of the Sabine women. Continuing, Porsenna, the Etruscan king that attempted to restore Tarquin's tyranny. This includes the deeds of Cloelia, who led a group of women to safety when battling against the aforementioned king. Curiously, the historical mentions jump from when the Gauls sacked the city to the Catalan conspiracy. Therefore, just about all of the history of the Republic is skipped. This passage ends with the great naval battle at Actium between Augustus and Mark Antony. Jocularly, focus is paid to Cleopatra's flight, which causes Antony to also flee. The poet surely seeks favor when he praises Augustus' triumph.
3 shining nights and 3 succeeding days. The fields resound with shouts, the streets with praise, the domes with songs, the theaters with plays. Great Caesar sits sublime upon his throne, before Apollo's porch of Parian stone. Vast crowds of vanquished nations march along, various in arms, in habit, and in tongue.
All this future history was, somehow, represented on that one single shield that Vulcan crafted. Of course, it is admitted, Aeneas does not understand the images, but understands that they are important. LOL. In the next book, the war begins. The future Romans find themselves in a very similar condition to the old Trojans. As usual, I now gift you an aphorism I came up with as I read this poem.
The slope that leads to heaven is so slippery that for most it is best not to try climbing for fear of slipping further.
Book 9, Honoring the Fallen. While Aeneas is out gathering allies, Hera, the envious wife of Zeus, sends Iris, her divine messenger, to advise Turnus to immediately attack the Trojan camp. Remember that Turnus feels that Aeneas, the foreign immigrant, is stealing his fiancée. When the Latin troops arrive at the Trojan camp, a lookout is quoted raising the alarm.
Arm, and man the works. Prepare your spears and pointed darts. The Latian host appears.
Luckily, the refugees had previously constructed a wooden wall to protect their camp. I find noteworthy the description of how the Latin leader surveys the enemy.
So roams the nightly wolf about the fold, wet with descending showers and stiff with cold. He grins, growls, and howls for the hunger pain. He flaunts his sharp gnashing teeth in vain, and in impotent anger finds no way, with distended paws to grasp the prey.
Yes, Turnus is frustrated, and his frustration only grows as he even fails to burn the Trojan ships. Although it would not have been consequential to the war, as the refugees do not intend to leave, Zeus transforms the ships into sea nymphs. The reason for this divine intervention is obscure. The ships had been crafted from sacred wood, never mind the details. Although all the Latins were astounded at the divine intervention, Turnus paints a positive light on the occurrence as he tells his troops that now, nonetheless, the Trojan camp is surrounded and unable to seek aid. Furthermore, let me quote him as he says,
Can they securely trust their feeble fence? A thin partition is but a brief delay. Let all the Tuscans, all the Arcadians, join. Nor these, nor those, shall prevent my intent. Refresh your bodies and prepare your arms. In the morning we shall conclude this war.
Subsequently, as night falls, the poet describes how each force portions out the duty to keep watch. Among others, Nisus and Euryalus are selected at random to guard the Trojan wall. Once again, note how ancient man trusted random selection. Nisus, who is a bit older, tells Euryalus that he is going to take the initiative and attempt stealthily crossing the Latin position. They must get news about the siege to Aeneas. The young Euryalus is moved by the daring nature of the enterprise and says,
All this and leaving me behind. Am I unworthy, Nisus, to join? May you share some of the glory this will yield. The thing called life, with ease I can disclaim, and think it overvalued at the exchange of fame.
Nisus voices his worries for the younger man, which perhaps foreshadows the subsequent events. Either way, for the time being, both seek out the camp's military council and ask for permission to attempt breaking out of the enemy siege. I should note that as a tragic foreshadowing, many references are made to Euryalus' mother, the possible loss of her relatively young son. The military elders praise the two men's initiative and daring as they say,
Ye brave young men, what equal gifts can we, in recompense of such desert, decree? The greatest, sure, and best you can receive, the gods and your own conscious worth will give.
I find jocular how someone in the council tells them that when they triumph, the two young men will be rewarded with 12 young and beautiful handmaids. Euryalus responses that he merely wishes for his mother to be cared for if he happens to be killed. The two men leave with the utmost quiet and secrecy. In the Latin camp, they find the enemy is not properly organized. They take the liberty of killing many sleeping foes. In nearly all cases, the assassinations are silent and without any fighting. When they make it to the woods outside the enemy position, however, their luck changes. They are discovered by a troop of horsemen and are forced to flee with all their might. In the flight, the young man is separated from the elder. In the darkness, Nisus feels forced to return and search for Euryalus. He finds that his companion is in trouble. He is surrounded by a small group of enemies. Nisus prays for divine strength, throws a deadly javelin at a horseman. A fight ensues and, alas, they are both killed. The poet eulogizes the fallen warriors as he says,
"O happy friends, for, if my verse can give immortal life, your fame shall ever live, fixed as the Capitol's foundation lies, and spread wherever the Roman eagle flies."
The next day, although themselves surprised at how many were assassinated, the Latins, in an attempt to scare the Trojans, impale the heroes' heads on pikes and parade them around the Trojan walls, of course. Euryalus' mother sees his son's severed head, and the poet quotes her.
Was it on this face my famished eyes I fed? Ah, how unlike the living is the dead. How could thou leave me, cruel, thus alone? Not one kind kiss from a departing son. For this, alas, I left my needful ease, exposed my life to winds and winter seas. Thou, Jove, I beg, conclude my woe. Send me thunderstruck to rest below.
After the mortifying parade, the Latins attack. Mention is made of how the Trojans, by their prior war, are expert defenders. Nonetheless, the Latins meet some successes. They manage to bring down a large wooden tower, for example. What ensues is a very prolonged and, in my mind, overly complicated description of much fighting. Along the description, always, perhaps mimicking Homer, there are most striking analogies, consider.
Thus on some silver swan or timorous hare, Jove's bird comes sousing down from upper air. So seizes the grim wolf the tender lamb, in vain lamented by the bleeding dam.
I find it curious, as it could be argued that such comparisons unquestionably diminish any possible moral valuation. These deaths are like the deaths natural to life, nature, the cosmos. Pray and prayed. Not evil versus good. Unfortunately, this is not the time or place to discuss what is Homeric morality, what is the often utterly misunderstood moral messages in these epic poems. For a little about that, make sure to watch the final section of this series. The descriptions are also very gory and bloody. On one occasion, as Turnus enters a killing spree, consider.
The second shaft comes swift and unespied. It pierces his hand and nails it to his side, perforating his breathing lungs and beating heart. The soul comes issuing out and hisses against the dart. Thrice whirls the belt around his head and flings the heated lead half melted as it flies. It pierces his hollow temples, his brain through. The youth tumbles down as he kicks the ground.
If it were a movie, these scenes would not be for children, LOL. At one moment during the battle, Turnus' brother-in-law shouts insults at the defending Trojans. He refers to the war in Troy and how the Latins rear their children in a Spartan manner.
Strong from the cradle of a sturdy brood, we subject our newborns to the river. No sports but what belong to war, they know. To break the stubborn colt, to bend the bow. At all stages of life a war prepare. No class or inheritance is exempt.
Notice, once again, war and such deaths are a natural element of existence. In response to these insults, the son of Aeneas, Ascanius, shoots an arrow that kills the speaker. Seeing the young boy grow impetuous and overdaring, Apollo intervenes in human form and tells the Trojans to keep the young prince out of harm's way. Thus, he is retired from the wall, but will fight again later. There is much more fighting that I will skip over. I should note that this portion, and the subsequent book, are most like Homer's Iliad. At one point, even, Turnus brands himself a new Achilles. He says this as he manages to break through the Trojan wall. However, pushing too far, he is quickly left unattended and unsupported. Finding himself in peril, the poet describes his situation and mentality.
He loses while in vain he presses on, nor will his courage let him dare to run. So Turnus fares, and, unresolved of flight, briefly moves back as soon as he withdraws. Twice again, in rage, the combat he renews.
As he is attacked on all sides, the poet says that Turnus' armor is worn, his shield is covered with darts and arrows, he is exhausted and bloody. Thus, Hera intervenes and by her divine power sweeps him out of danger.
Fame is never cheaper than when it merely costs life.
Book 10, Fortune Favors the Bold. The battle described in the 9th book has not ended. The Trojan encampment survives, but the Latins continue to attack it. In Mount Olympus, Zeus calls a council of all the deities to discuss the war. He explains that it is ordained that the Trojans will live and give birth to the people, the Romans, that will rule the world. As such, for the deities to quarrel over current affairs is fruitless. He makes reference to Carthage, Rome's future great enemy, when he says,
Then will be time for faction and division. To pick and choose favorites and detested.
Venus replies insisting that she must be allowed to help her child and grandson, especially as Hera continues to intervene against them. Hera in response argues that it is unfair for the Trojans to take foreign soil and another man's bride. Nonetheless, after both sides have spoken, Zeus insists that all must abstain from interfering and simply let fortune fall where it may. There are some more descriptions of the fighting until Aeneas is finally mentioned. Remember that he was away gathering new allies. Now he sets sail with his new troops. The poet requisitions aid from the muse to catalog the forces he brings. This is similar to the previous catalogs, like Homer's catalog of Grecian ships. I will not mention any of this. Curiously, the Trojan ships that Zeus saved in the 8th book appear. Now they are sea nymphs. They tell Aeneas to accelerate his voyage, and they warn the army to be ready to fight as soon as they arrive. When arriving, the hero uses his shield as a sunlight reflector to communicate with the besieged Trojans. This raises their spirit and threatens to panic the Latin attackers. Therefore, Turnus, the leader of the native Italians, gives his troops a rallying and inspiring speech. His words contain the now immortal lines,
Fortune favors the bold.
Allow me to mention that although it is bold for Turnus to risk being encircled, it is also audacious for Aeneas to attempt a challenged amphibious landing. He seems like Brasidas disembarking on Perilous. Yes, the Trojan also rallies the courage of his men as he tells them to boldly crash their ships on the enemy shoreline. By the way, Brasidas was a Spartan of immortal fame. His deeds are described by Thucydides. Much fighting ensues. The Trojans gain a foothold and eventually advance to relieve the besieged camp. Nonetheless, the Latins do not retire. Rather, they fight a series of Iliad-style single combats. First, descending from his chariot, Turnus challenges Evander's son, a youth named Pallas. You will remember that in Book 8 Evander was the Greek king who allied with Aeneas. In the ensuing combat, lances are thrown. The youth's shot only graces Turnus, but the Latin's shot pierces the youth. Turnus then not only kills Pallas, but also steals some of his apparel. I guess he does this as collecting a trophy. Either way, Aeneas finds this theft very insulting. I would like to note that at least Turnus did not parade the corpse like Achilles did Hector. The next such fight is between Aeneas and a certain Magus. Defeated, Magus begs for his life and the Trojan leader responds.
After Prince Pallas fell, in a single act Turnus broke all decorum and civility of war.
The Trojan also kills another challenger and says,
Lie there, proud man, unpitied on the plain. Lie there inglorious, and without a tomb, far from thy mother and thy native home, exposed to savage beasts and birds of prey, or thrown for food to monsters of the sea.
I cannot avoid interpreting that the combat is growing even more barbaric, less civilized and crueler. After some more fighting, it becomes clear that the Trojans will triumph. Zeus aims to appease Hera, telling her that the refugees succeeded on their own, without any divine intervention. The queen in turn requests that she be allowed to save Turnus' life. She says that he is a guiltless youth that did not deserve any of this fate. Zeus allows her to intervene, and by her powers, creating an image that seems like Aeneas, she guides the courageous Latin to safety. Turnus is deceived into thinking he is chasing the Trojan hero, but unintentionally ends up on a ship that Hera sets to flow away from the battle. When Turnus realizes what has occurred, he is most distraught. He asks himself the likes of,
What will they say of their deserting ruler? The war was mine until the hardship grew. I led the slaughter, and when it turned, I fled. And from afar their dying groans I spectate.
He wishes to either attempt swimming back to the shoreline or to simply kill himself by his own sword. But Hera detains his heart, and thus he simply floats away. When the Latin troops realize that their king has abandoned them, they are most angry and turn their emotions on the king's brother, Mezentius. Commendably, this one assumes command and, despite lacking troops, continues to fight. Nonetheless, the majority of the Latin force is routed and slaughtered. The poet says of this,
The gods from heaven survey the fatal strife, and mourn the miseries of human life. Above the rest, two goddesses appear. Concerned for each, here Venus, Hera there.
Note that in these lines war, its pains and miseries, is condemned. Mezentius, Turnus' brother, fights with Aeneas. He is defeated and is about to be killed, but his son, Lausus, intervenes.
The pious youth, by love careless of self, entered lifting his sword with only one aim, to protect his father and prevent his death. Shouts of applause run through the field, to see the son the vanquished father shield.
Alas, the boy is wounded. Aeneas is moved by the tragedy of the event and ceases to fight. Unfortunately, since the wound was too deep, Lausus nonetheless dies. Mezentius is also hurt. He gathers his strength and cleans his wounds with water from the Tiber. When his son's corpse is brought to him, he says,
To see my son, and such a son, resign his life, a ransom for preserving mine. And am I then preserved, and art thou lost? How much too dear has that redemption cost? I owe my people that same end. With no resentment I clamor the fate.
Since he is so heartbroken, he decides that he will not flee but die in a last fight. He launches his lance at Aeneas and, jocularly in my mind, the projectile bounces off the hero's shield and wounds a bystander. Either way, Aeneas kills him and thus ends this book. In the next book, the Trojans go on the offensive. In response, the female warrior, Camilla, assumes command of the Latin force. Don't miss it. Now, as always, I gift you an aphorism I crafted as I read this poem.
Since only those who believe they can, the self-deceivers are more successful than the realist.
Book 11, Great Camilla and Her Female Warriors. After the great battle that liberated the besieged Trojan camp, Aeneas is celebrated by the victors. In the meantime, news of their defeat reaches the Latin capital, and its people panic. Before further conflict, however, the dead must be buried. Among the Trojan forces, the most lamented is Evander, the son of the allied Greek king. Aeneas weeps over the youth's body and is quoted as if speaking to the absent king.
Wounded sire, thou shalt not suffer dishonor by the loss of your son. Thou shalt not blush, old man, however grieved. Thy palace no dishonest wound received. He died no death to make you wish that you had not lived to witness. What a champion has the Ausonian coast. What a friend hast thou, Ascanius, lost.
Remember that Ascanius is Aeneas' child. The poet then describes how the prince's body is prepared and carried over to his native city. Likewise, he quotes the lamentations of the king when he beholds his dead son. Although this king says much, perhaps the most consequential is that he makes clear that he is not angry at Aeneas. Soon after the prior ceremony, a group of messengers arrive from Laurentum, their principal foe. They ask for a truce and permission to gather their deceased. Aeneas agrees, but also adds,
Turnus then should try his cause in arms to conquer or to die. In equal arms let the two of us compete. Let whomever the fates prefer succeed. This is the only way for him to keep the royal virgin and honorable serenity.
In the funeral, both sides cremate their dead. Afterwards, the Trojans bury the ashes by constructing a large earth mount. Lastly, both sides mourn and recuperate for 3 days. As for the Latin town, their situation grows even more desperate as not only are the people very angry with Turnus, but also message arrives that Diomedes refuses to join their efforts. Remember, this is the great hero from the Iliad that was mentioned in Book 8. The messengers quote the hero as saying,
"What madness has so altered your minds? To exchange tranquil rest for uncertain conflict? Have not ever your ancestors abhorred? In unclear sword, to solicit arms unknown?"
I very much like the reference of abhorring foreign military aid, such as mercenaries. Alas, far too many civilizations have met their end by using wealth to substitute military autonomy. Diomedes' message further describes the might of the Trojans and the terrible fate all the triumphant Greek heroes had to meet. Among other examples, he says that Odysseus is still lost at sea and that he lost his wife and home. As such, let there be no doubt that it is utmost folly to defy the will of Venus. Likewise, Diomedes says that among the Trojan Aeneas was second only to Hector in military ability. Therefore, his counsel is,
"Make peace, ye Latians, and avoid with care the impending dangers of a fatal war."
The Latin king proposes to his council that they make peace by conceding much land to the Trojans. A certain Drances takes the opportunity to undercut Turnus' political standing. He not only blames Turnus, but also insists that they should continue offering the princess to Aeneas. How the poet describes this man is noteworthy. Consider.
Factious and rich, bold at the council board, but cautious in the field, he shuns the sword. A secret caballer, courageous only in his tongue.
In other words, a coward with big words. Turnus grows angry as he defends himself against the accusations. He reminds the council that they were not wholly defeated as they did kill many Trojans. What is more, he insists that the Trojans may yet be defeated as they were by the Greeks. He says he will willingly fight Aeneas in single combat. However, before they may vote, because they would have voted, the whole meeting is interrupted by news that the Trojan army is approaching the city. Virgil describes the townsfolk's panic. Turnus arms himself and gathers as many soldiers as he can. Then Camilla, the warrior maiden, re-enters the narrative. She tells Turnus to stay and defend the city while she fights in the nearby woodland. He welcomes her offer and proposes that her fight will give him time to prepare an ambush. As such, the plan is made that Camilla and her troops will delay the Trojans while Turnus prepares the ploy. It turns out that Camilla is favored by none other than Latonian Phoebe, the mother of Apollo and Artemis. Seeing what is to come, the goddess says,
Camilla goes to meet her death amidst her fatal foes. Of all the nymphs I ever cared for her most. Now to waste all the alms and aid I gave.
She continues by describing the maiden's life or upbringing. As an orphan, Camilla was saved by a deposed king named Metabus. This one not only saved her, but also reared her in the most militant and self-sufficient manner. She spent all her childhood in the wilderness learning how to hunt, take care of herself, and master the use of weapons. She became so famous for her autonomy and impressive in her ability and prowess that when she grew up,
The Tuscan matrons with each other vied to bless their own son with such a bride. But she happily refuses them a possibility. In the shaded woods she enjoys her virginity.
of course, not only an unmarried virgin, but also became, somehow, a queen and military general. Either way, after telling all this about her, Phoebe sends a nymph with orders to kill and revenge whoever kills Camilla. The ensuing battle is between troops of horsemen and chariots. Much occurs that I will skip over. The Latins, with Camilla as leader, are initially successful in withstanding the Trojans. It is curious to read that Camilla is accompanied by a special troop of fellow women. They all fight as if they were Amazonians. LOL. Speaking of her feats, let me quote.
Of all her deadly darts, not one she lost. Each yielded or collected a Trojan ghost, dominating with ease and insulting the fallen.
Here cease thy vaunts and own my victory. A woman warrior was too strong for thee. Yet, if Hades demands thy conqueror's name, confess it was great Camilla, don't be ashamed.
Truly, this seems as if a modern text. A strong female heroine. Eventually, one man dares Camilla to descend from her chariot and fight him one-on-one. She concedes and the challenger quickly loses his heart and flees. LOL. However, it is at this moment that another, hiding behind some vegetation, stealthily shoots her down. After the deed, the poet describes the assassin's flight to that of a dog that knows he has misbehaved. However, the nymph sent by the goddess does as she was instructed and kills him. In the meantime, with her dying breath, Camilla sends word to Turnus letting him know that they cannot hold the position any longer. Therefore, the Latin is unable to complete his preparations and thus moves back into the city. The entrance to the city, with the rushing crowd and the mass of routed troops, turns into a great chaos, while the Latins are pursued by the enemy.
The Latian virgins, valiant in despair, arm the towers, wishing to share the danger. So much zeal their country's cause inspired. So much Camilla's great example fired. Willing to exchange their lives for liberty, competing over which is most daring.
As a result, thanks to the young women, the attacking Trojans fail to quickly capture the city, and a siege ensues.
Blessed are those who regret, because only they shall introspect.
Book 12, Hera makes the Trojans into Latins. With Camilla dead, the city besieged, Turnus is desperate to redeem himself. The poet compares him to a hunted, wounded hog that is ready to cease fleeing and instead wishes to die in a last charge. The Latin hero says,
No more excuses or delays, I stand. In arms prepared to combat, hand to hand. The Latians unconcerned shall see the fight. This arm unaided shall assert your right. Then, if my prostrate body hits the floor, my enemy may take my bride and crown.
Hearing these words, the Latin king and queen beg him to stay put, to simply fight defending the town. Yet, Turnus is fully determined. He leaves the town and meets the Trojan army. The intent is clear, and Aeneas likewise prepares to meet him in a single combat. Bystanders gather, two armed sides, each rooting for their own champion. Looking down from heaven, Hera, the queen of the gods, speaks to a nymph named Nyes. This is a sister of Turnus that, after consorting with Zeus, had gained the status of deity. The queen of the gods explains to her that,
Of every Latin beauty whom Jove seduced, to mount by stealth my often betrayed bed, only with you I do not resent his unfaithfulness.
Meaning, although Nyes slept with Zeus, Hera's husband, the queen of Mount Olympus does not dislike her. She begs her to help protect Turnus' life. Nyes hesitates to intervene, but does say she would like to help her brother. Before the fight, both heroes take their turns reciting some prayers, and then both make a testament in case they are defeated. Curiously, the poet makes it clear that Turnus is the lesser fighter. Therefore, unwilling to see her warrior fall, Hera intervenes further. She changes shape into a man and joins the side of the Latin bystanders. There she says, as if she were a fellow Latin soldier,
No doubt Turnus, in this unequal strife, shall lose, with honor, his devoted life. But you, a servile and inglorious band, foreign lords shall sow your native land. Those fields your fighting fathers gained, their lazy sons will no longer possess.
These words rage or invigorate the Latins. What is more, a seeming favorable omen is cited. An eagle is seen pursued and defeated by a flock of smaller birds. Therefore, the individual fight is avoided. Filled with spiteful courage, the Latins charge the Trojans, and a conventional battle ensues. Aeneas is wounded by an anonymous arrow, a projectile whose source lies unknown. He is carried from the battlefield, and Virgil gruesomely describes how the hero himself yanks out the dart. In the meantime, Turnus regains his heart and is successful in killing many of his enemies. A doctor named Iapis has trouble healing Aeneas, therefore Venus intervenes. She prepares her own ointment or poison and applies it to her son. The doctor is amazed to see how Aeneas' wound magically and rapidly heals. He says to those around him,
This is no mortal work, no cure of mine. No skill or art but that of hands divine. Only God could have saved him from collapse. A powerful divinity has revived our leader.
The Trojan hero therefore rises, bestows upon his son the eternal duty to assert his birthright, and returns to the fight. Many more die until the Latins are routed from the field. Turnus wishes to fight to the death, but Hera takes control of his chariot and drives him away. The routed troops did not, however, return to their city. It now sits open for attack. Thus, rather than pursue, Aeneas leads the Trojans to take the Latin town. Seeing the enemy approach, the Latin queen is quick to kill herself. The princess Lavinia, the girl who began the conflict, breaks into tears and lamentations. Turnus begs divinity permission to end his life not in flight, but in an honorable fight. Finally, Hera allows him to return to the city and calls for Aeneas to fight him as previously agreed. Once again, the Trojan concedes and they fight. As they fight, Turnus' sword is shattered on the Vulcan armor worn by Aeneas. Thus, shamefully, he once again flees. This time he is not forced to flee by the power of any divinity. He merely flees as he is unarmed. Aeneas pursues until Hera intervenes, giving Turnus a new sword. Exasperated by the interferences, Zeus speaks to his wife, aiming to calm her passions and to have her accept the unavoidable. The Queen of the Gods manages a crucial concession. She says she will let Aeneas triumph only if the Trojan do not retain their Trojan ways. She wants them to adopt the Latin language and many of the Latin cultural symbols and practices. Zeus agrees, and so a second fight takes place. Without any interference from either Venus or Hera, Aeneas finally defeats Turnus. Wounded, the Latin says,
Let all witness how defeated I beg for life. I surrender and concede my city and my wife. Against a yielding man there is only ignoble strife.
For a brief moment the Trojan considers it, but then he sees how Turnus wears the belt he previously took from Pallas, the son of Evander, the allied king. Angry at seeing this, Aeneas loses all his sense of pity and, soaking his arms in blood, kills the helpless man. Believe it or not, perhaps leaving the rest to history or imagination, right there and there, the epic poem comes to an end. Remember that the final compilation will begin with my analysis and review of the whole work. It should help in understanding the obscure moral messages and the philosophical influence this book had on Western civilization. Now, as always, consider a new aphorism.
If it is to strengthen the recipient, pain must either be soft or passing.